Oh, hi, Joby. Welcome back. Thank you. Okay, so we're ready to go on to the next tshuva. What we had just started yesterday was the she'elah. Um, at what point can a person cancel his partnership? Okay, so a person told his friend, Mishamar lechaver Ruvain. Shimon says to his friend Ruvain, Kanes chorezu shenim tzedetz alevi. Go ahead, put down some money to purchase some merchandise from Levi. Vani eshtatefimcha v'holach ukapekana. I will become your partner. And lo and behold, Ruvain went ahead, bought the merchandise, gets a whole warehouse of widgets or whatever it is. And then Shimon starts to have a change of heart. Ha'im Shimon ha'mishaleach yachol hitcharet v'lachzer bo mehashut v'sim Ruvain. Can Shimon now back out? Oh, Kaven Shekiyim Shlichuto Einu Yochel Lachzer Bo. Or once Ruvain follows his instructions, Shimon's on the hook. So how does it work? What is the level of liability if you just gave verbal instructions to someone? So the answer is Misha Omer lechavero kanes chorazu v'ani eshtatef imcha bo teschor v'holach b'kana lo yachol lachzer bo keven shenachshav tishlucho. So Shimon does not have that option of withdrawing or canceling because Ruvain was his proxy. I appointed you my proxy, even if it's just verbal, you can't back out. V'chenim omer lechavero, kanes chora b'ma'otecha v'ani eshtatefimcha. And similarly, if a person says to his friend, buy some merchandise with your own money and I'll become your partner, ואפילו אומר לו בסתם, ולא פירש לו את סוג הסחורה ואת הסיכום שהוא מוכן להוציא כדי להיות שותף בה, and even if there's no specificity in those instructions, like let's say I tell a guy, I tell you like my son, I want to see him succeed. So I say, you know what, son, go out, lay out some of your money, buy some merchandise. I'll be your partner. I'll show you the ropes and I'll show you how we can sell it and make money. I don't specify what kind of merchandise. I don't tell them how much. I don't tell them what price. Okay. Nasa shutav tekev kishakana. Doesn't matter. The Ruvain has become his partner as soon as he acquires those goods. Ele imkain kana schara yoter min harigilut ba'ofen hazeh, lo nasa hamishalech shutav avarot schara shekana chaver. Unless he makes an abnormal kind of purchase. In other words, if he does something that's completely out of the ordinary for that industry, so then Shimon could say afterwards, that's not what I meant. And it should have been obvious to anyone in the industry who's in the buying and selling, should have known that that was not what I was expecting. Okay. So, but if he goes ahead and buys something that if a regular person will look at it and say, well, that seems reasonable, so then you can't back out of it. Now, what is this based on? So he's quoting the Ramah in Siman Kuf Pei Beis, B'Shem Shuvas Harashba, Shapasak Omer Lechavero Kach Schor Zu V'Shtatef Imcha B'Halach V'Kana Lo Yachol Achzabot Avi Kishlucha. Says those exact words, and the Nesivos. Hosifu al din zeh, shehu hadinim omer kach schor stam b'ma'otecha v'shtefim. So the Nesivus says even if you just say buy merchandise without specificity, afilu lo yichad lo shum schar nasa shutav tekev k'shekanav afilu omer lo yached lo shum schar. Even if you just said, I want you to set aside certain merchandise. Achenim kana yoter min harigilut, devadi lo asek adai de meshaleach, litemos kolkach, ein lechapos lo meshlesh ken yochel meshech lomar, dadai te dahachi lo nit kavanti. But if it's something that's abnormal that he buys this exorbitant amount, where the dispatcher could say, Shimon could say in this case, I never meant that, and you should have known that I never meant that. V'yesh la'ayin yochel lachzor mikol hashutvis or rak me ha'odef. Aval ma sheyesh regilos liknos chora b'sach kach v'kach bein hashutvin bazein yochel lachzor bo. Okay, v'in shekana yotem me'haragilit but l'kol hashutvis v'tzarachiyim. So he says, what's not clear is, what if I tell you, go ahead and buy some widgets, we'll sell them. Reuven goes ahead and buys 1,000,000 widgets. Well, a normal amount would be to buy 1,000 widgets and to sell them 1,000 at a time. So am I still on the hook for 1,000, even though he bought 1,000,000, and then he's got to deal with the other 999,000? Or am I completely off the hook because this is a nightmare? So he says that's not clear in halacha.
So if he didn't, I mean, an agreement, but he didn't buy anything or have any outlay, then you can cancel?
Yeah, if there's been no outlay yet, so there's no harm, no foul, right? So you can cancel. Because you can always cancel a proxy ship before the person executes. That's something that's explicit in the Gemara. If I send the guy to do something and then I call him to abort, as long as he hasn't done it yet, that's perfectly legal. Okay.
I guess he'd have to be compensated for his time and effort, though.
Would you argue that he has to be compensated? It's possible if the guy there's an outlay. So there's an outlay of expense, even though it's not for the purpose of the purchase of the merchandise, but let's say he flew to a faraway place and so forth. Yeah, he would have to probably pay for that. Okay, let us go on. Okay. So now he's going on to another topic, which is called Sha'ar Kinyanim, methods of acquisition. Kinyan Kesef b'Metaltalin. So the question is as follows. So this is entitled Purchasing Cash with Chattel. Okay. Or in other words, how is a transaction of we'll see different types of acquisitions will depend on the type of item that's being purchased, and the normative way of purchasing items is with cash. Okay. Midin Torah hakesef kona ben karka ben metaltalin. V'yesh lishol mahatam shetiknu chachamim shlo yikna hakesef es hametaltalin ela im kein asa b'chefetz kinyan hagba'o kinyan mashicha. So we know that the Torah law says, and this is something that's discussed in the Gemara, that midioraisa kesef kona, that as soon as I put down money and I give you cash, I immediately become the owner of the object that you are selling me. That's the Torah law. So if, let's say, you have a warehouse that's filled with lawnmowers and I want to buy a lawnmower, as soon as I give you the cash or I do the e-transfer, whatever I've done, you now have my money. I own that lawnmower. However, the rabbi stepped in and they said, no, you don't own the lawnmower until you actually take physical acquisition of it. Okay? So it's a two-step process. The Torah says that you own the lawnmower as soon as you lay down cash for it. But the Chachamim stepped in and said, no, you don't own the lawnmower until you take physical possession through either lifting it up or pulling it towards you. The question is, why is that? Now, can you think of any reason why that would be?
I think we learned this before, the fact that the wheat that's sitting in someone else's property, and they won't take care of it because it's now yours, if there's a fire or something like that. Isn't there something about that? Is that my own right track?
Yeah, you are. Exactly. The reason is because Shema Yomar Lo Nisrafu Chitecha Ba'aliyah, that the farmer that you're buying the wheat from or the vendor that you're buying the lawnmower from could say there was a terrible catastrophe and the warehouse burned down and your lawnmower is gone. So, in order to protect the welfare of the consumer, the Chachamim said, you don't become the owner until you take physical acquisition. So let's see. Chachamim zal asu
Rabbi, this doesn't apply to non-Jews, it's only for Jews or something?
I don't know. I don't know if this applies to Jews or non-Jews equally. I don't recall whether there's such a distinction. Chachamenu asu takana zu litovas halokeach. The Chachamim did this for the welfare of the consumer. Shekesef lo yikna ele imkein higbia o mashachas hakesef elav, that you don't acquire until you actually physically bring it towards you or lift it up. Batamhu kevin shepa'amim yiten halokeach estimei hachefetz bekodem sheyikachenu ye'aved ba'ones. The reason is that sometimes the buyer will purchase an item, and while it's still in the possession of the seller, something will happen to it. Kagon shenafla the lake of an Israel, like a fire will break out. Obo listim and atlu, or robbers will break in and steal it. V'miyeh b'rishus halokeach yismama hamocher v'lo yatzilo kevin shu kvar shayach lakona. And we're worried that if the guy's already bought it, then the seller is not going to go to extreme steps to try and save it, because he says it's not mine anymore. Okay, the chvar kibeles temuros, I've already gotten paid for this. Leficha che'amidu chachamim es hachefetz b'rshus hamocher kedei sheyishtadel v'yitrach lahatzilas hachefetz kamo shematzilas mamon. And therefore the chachamim said, no, we still are, we are going to consider it to be yours, the seller, during this time, so that if something does potentially happen that you can avert a disaster, you're not going to be lackadaisical about it. You're going to take it seriously, because if it does get destroyed, then if it does get destroyed, then it's your loss. You're going to have to give the money back to the buyer. Okay.
Remember, there is another stuff that could also happen too. This happens with me sometimes. I will pay, let's say I want to have some materials that I want to bring in from Europe. So and the supplier will want money in advance. So I pay them the money in advance. They send it, but then something happens to the shipment. It's either not delivered to me, lost, or
While
something
it's
like
in
that.
transit, yeah.
So now, there's a third party all of a sudden involved here.
Right. So who's liable in that case? Right. Who is liable?
Yeah, it's complicated. That's why they use, first of all, they stipulate where the risk lies along the transit.
Okay.
right? And they also have facilities like letters of credit, which are called upon, at certain stages in the transaction, right? And then a third party bank will release money on happening of certain things, right? So that's how they protect those sort of things.
That's on larger transactions, but on smaller transactions, they're not gonna go through the whole thing of letter of credit and everything.
Yeah, I'm not sure how big.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because you got this, who's really responsible here?
Yeah,
So if you recall, we did learn about the Amazon shipping. We talked about that for the small consumer, right? If I make a purchase from someone and he sends it in the mail, as long as I have given tacit approval that he can put it in the mail, then as soon as it leaves his possession, I become liable. That's not Amazon's policy, because Amazon realizes that they have to keep the consumer happy. It's not worth it for them as a business model.
Right.
But technically in halacha, if I tell you, go ahead and ship it to me, then I'm the one who's liable once they put it on that shipment. Because the seller can always say, listen, do you want it to be insured? Do you want to insure the transport? And then it becomes the responsibility of the buyer.
We'll pick it up.
Or come and pick it up yourself. Yeah. Okay.
So there's no concept of just allowing the seller to be a shomer until it's picked up.
Yeah, he's a shomer. He's a shomer. Whether he's a shomer chinam or a shomer sachar is an interesting question. it would seem that he's a shomer sachar because he's been compensated for these goods.
Right.
If that's if the guy has already done a mashicha, but if he hasn't
Yes.
done a mashicha yet, if he hasn't acquired them yet, he's not a shomer at all.
Right, it's
They're,
still
they're
his.
still,
It's still his.
it's still his. He also writes in the notes, he says, "Chvar kasavna b'shuva l'kaman," as will indicate in a responsum later on, and this is brought explicitly in the Shulchan Aruch. Agam shechachamim amru shein kesef koine, even though the chachamim said that an outlay of cash does not consummate the deal, im nosan kesef al hamekach asur levatel hamekach. But if a guy laid out cash, then and he paid the seller, he's not allowed to just cancel the sale and say, "I want my money back." Elatzarach lekaimo, but rather he has to go ahead with the deal. B'chol hachozer bo, based in, excuse me, if a person does go back on his word and he demands his money back, the Beis Din will curse him. Shem lo yamod b'diburo Hashem yisbarach yifra mimenu kamo shenifra midor haflaga. That anyone who does not keep his word, God will punish that person.
There's a word we came up with.
It's called Mishpat. He gets the curse of Mishpat. That's exactly it. It's Mishpat, he who exacted vengeance from the generation of the flood and the generation of the Sodomites. He will, and from the generation of the Tower of Babel, he will extract vengeance from someone who does not fulfill his word. Now, that would be the case. Would a person be entitled still to say, "I don't care, I'll take the curse and I want my money back"? So he doesn't say that. He doesn't say. What if a person put down partial payment? So these are things that we have to still clarify once again. So then he says, "Urei bebeis Yosef shehevi es das asovrim shemamekach nimtzo b'makom shein chashash lidleika hamaos konos." So the Beis Yosef brings an opinion that says that if the merchandise is in a place where there's no fear that it could get destroyed, okay, then we say that the money does the layout of money does consummate the deal. V'habeis Yosef sham dacha divreihem she'nira ken midivrei haposkim v'chazal lo plug b'takanasam lanosum divreim l'shimur. And the Beis Yosef disagrees. He says, like, you can't say that in this case the money consummates and in this case the hagbah consummates. No, there's a low plug. Low plug means the chachamim make no distinction. Once they made a takana, it's binding in all cases. V'harama b'hagasham hevi l'dei yazu b'shem yesh omrim. V'hashach b'sifkat ntes v'hanasivos. Hichriu kedas hashulchan aruch shebechol gavna ein amos konos kishehisnu b'neim shakesef yikna hamekach.
I'm also thinking, Rabbi, you would never want to say this is a place where nothing could happen. Because there's no such place really. You said about the Titanic, it's a ship that even God can't sink.
That's unsinkable, yeah.
I mean, you put it in some vault somewhere, but some safe crack comes in, takes it, like, I don't know, like it just.
Okay. He then quotes from the Ramah, who says that what if they make an explicit contract that the money outlay does cause the transaction? So the Ramah says, "Shemahani akinin ala mekach keshehusnu b'neim shakesef yakinin v'nikna hamekach bekesef." So he says, however, the Shach disagrees. He says, "Delo nehira de'epi ola tanai lasos medavar she'eno kinyan shia kinyan she'eno kinyan ela devarim ba'alma." So the Ramah says, I disagree. Chachamim say this is not a kinyan. How can you turn something that's not a kinyan into a kinyan? Amnam rov ha'achronim pasku kedas ha'Ramah shemahani tanai shakesef yikna. But most poskim agree with the Ramah that if you stipulate that as soon as you outlay the money and the money reaches our bank account, you now become the owner of the goods. And that's part of the stipulation of the purchase agreement. So then that's legally binding. In other words, it could be there will be certain situations where a seller has a commodity that's so on demand that he can lay out the terms. And he can say, I know that normally I would be liable until I ship this item, but because I'm getting so many orders on this, once you lay out the money, there's no money back guarantee. There's no cancellation of the deal. No matter what, you now become the owner of this commodity.
Well, the buyer's gotta agree to that.
The buyer would have to agree. He's not going to release the money until he agrees. Yeah. Right? And I'm sure that exists in contract laws.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
Well, remember, when the real estate market's hot, the buyers will buy with no money down, finance approvals or no
Yeah.
inspection. It's a desperate house. Now, markets are weak right now. So a lot of people are demanding, so it depends on the
Buyer's market or sellers.
Right. Now, what about, this was Paul's question, is there any distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew? Le'inin kishi Yisrael kona mi goy, o goy kona mi Yisrael, ha'im mahani kinyan bekesef o she'en kona bekesef ela rak b'mashicha. Is the law the same? That kesef does not complete the transaction, but rather you need to pull the item towards you. So kasef harambam, shagoy li Yisrael o Yisrael goy kona umakna metaltalin b'mashicha o b'damin. The Rambam writes either one, either the physical taking of the merchandise or the outlay of cash. Either one is considered to be a completion of the transaction. What?
You miss Hagba.
Yeah, so Hagba and Mashicha go hand in hand. He says that if you're purchasing something for a mitzvah, let's say you're buying meat for a Seudas mitzvah, let's say you're making a bris, or yayin lekiddush uchadoma, or you're purchasing wine for kiddush, then we say ma'os konos. Then we say that the money actually, the outlay of the cash does complete the deal. Which is interesting. I wonder why that is. He says, Ayin Lamar in Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, Siman Kuf Tzadi Tesif Gimel Uvarama Sham B'Shein Omar Real. So let's see why that would be. Why would that make a difference? Just because you're buying something for a mitzvah. Maybe because Shluchei Mitzvah Inam Nizokim, because we have confidence that since you're purchasing it for a mitzvah, that God will watch over it. I'm wondering if that's the Kuf Tzadi Tes Sif Gimel. Let's just take a quick look at that. So the Mechaber says as follows. He says, Yesh Zman Shema'os Konos. There are times when an outlay of cash does consummate the deal. Shehemidu Chachamim Divreim al Din Torah Bebasar Be'arba Prakim. There are 4 instances where, let's say, you buy meat, and as soon as you lay down the cash and you give it to the butcher, you become the owner of that meat. What are those 4 instances? Ve'eluhein. Erev Yom Tov Ha'acharon Shel Chag, that's on the eve of Shmini Atzeres. The Erev Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, Erev Pesach. The Erev Ha'atzeres, the eve of Shavuos, and the Erev Rosh Hashanah. And why is that when you buy something during those periods, when you buy kosher food during those periods, the outlay of cash is binding. She'im haya letabach shor shavimea dinrim ולוקח מהלוקח דינר כדי ליתן לו בשר כשישחוט, ולא נתקבצו כל דמי השור, משחיתן עושו בעל כורחו כדי ליתן הבשר ללוקח. So he says this is actually to the benefit of the consumer. Why is it to the benefit of the consumer? Normally, we want to benefit the consumer by protecting, his assets. But here, when we talk about a butcher, we're talking about a person who's also a shochet. So it's a guy who sells chickens, or a guy who actually not chickens, but actually beef. Now, when you sell beef, you need at least 20, 30 customers in order to justify slaughtering an entire animal, right? So let's say, he gives the example, let's say a cow costs 100 dinars, or there's 100 dinars worth of meat on this cow, and a guy lays out 1 dinar because he wants 1 dinar's worth of meat, okay? The butcher takes that money on Erev Yantiv, but he's thinking to himself, I'm going to need 99 other dinars in order to justify shechting another cow. So we force him to shecht the cow as soon as he has accepted the money.
The 1 dinar.
The 1 dinar. Why? Because how can this guy's counting on you for the meat? So you can't say, well, I didn't get enough customers, so here's your money back. No, 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 no. For the benefit of the kosher consumer, we force you to shech the animal, even if you haven't been able to account for all of the meat being sold.
So the butcher didn't stipulate them.
So well, that's kedei liten habasar lelokech. So the thing is, does it have to be stipulated? So that's the point, is that on Erev Yantif, the butchers are at a disadvantage. This is the cost of you doing business. You can't deny a customer, I guess, unless you close shop, right? But if your shop is still open because you're hoping the customers will come, as soon as you take a customer's money, you are on the hook to deliver him meat. Lefichach im meit hashor meit lalokeach umafsid hadinar. But at the same time, we still protect the butcher. Let's say he has 1 cow left, and the cow that he's about to shecht ends up dying. The buyer loses out. So there is a protection to the.
It's not fair.
What do you mean it's not fair?
You put a dinar down for meat. It's not his responsibility to tell guys.
It is, but on Erev Yantif, the risks go both ways. On Erev Yantif, you're guaranteed your meat from the cow that I have in my backyard, whether I get enough customers or not. But at the same time, you accept liability that if the cow dies of natural causes before I can shecht it, or let's say I shecht it and it turns out to be a treifa, so then tough luck. Okay. And the Ramah then writes, "V'yesh mishakasav dehu adin hanosein mos al yayin lekiddush be'erev Shabbos dekana dechol ki haygavna hemidu divreim al din Torah." There is an opinion, says the Ramah, that this is true whenever you're buying something which is time sensitive, right? So then, let's say, for example, I'm buying wine on Erev Shabbos. As soon as I put down the money to the wine merchant, he's got to make sure that I get that wine. If he says he's got the merchandise, then that merchandise belongs to me as soon as I put down the money. Now, if it turns out that the wine is spoiled, he can say, sorry, the wine turned out to be a bad batch, but it's your tough luck. Here it is. If you want it, you can have it, but it doesn't taste good. But so the risk goes both ways. Let's say a guy outlays cash because he's making a bris in the morning, and he outlays cash to the caterer. The caterer can't say, well, I'm not liable, here's your money back. No, you're on the hook to provide me with catered food for my guests. And even though I only put down a small amount, but as soon as I put down money, you become liable. And if you don't, then you have to pay damages for failure to deliver what was owed to me.
Where this is happening a lot today, more in our world, is, especially with the real estate market right now. So what's happened is people put down money, for a condo that's gonna be built. And then what happens is, when the market collapses like right now, they put money down years ago, hoping that they have time to save and go in, and then things, the project doesn't go through because they don't have enough people, putting down payments now. So then this is this sort of similar situation here, because now they've lost out, first of all, on all these years of the market, and now, they're not gonna get their place.
Right. And so how does that work in on practical terms? There must be a clause in the contract protecting the developer. I'm not really sure how it works.
Yeah, there's certain clauses that cover certain risks that happen, and then the buyer can get his money back, the termination clause or whatever like that, but generally, the solvency of the buyer is not an excuse. If the market goes down and the buyer, in our condo, there's lots of buyers who got stuck. And they had to sell back to the vendor. There's a clause that says, if the buyer at closing 4 or 5 years later cannot pay, then they can sell the unit back to the vendor at a price stipulated by the builder, right? But they can't do anything else. They can't get off the hook. They have to close somehow. If not, they'll lose their unit, right? They'll just take it, whatever, and you lose your loan.
No, but what about the responsibility the other way,
Yeah.
from the
developer?
Yeah, so then there's insurance to cover that, and then the vendor, if it's the vendor's fault that he can't close, he has to cancel the project because his funding goes
Right.
down, then normally the deposits come back
That's
to the purchaser.
No damage?
Yeah, sometimes there's damages, it depends on, it's really clearly set out in these contracts these days. But you get your deposit back for sure.